Hey, everybody, y'all, welcome back. It is Charles and David, and we are back for another episode of Common Grounds of Self-Determination. Our partner in crime, Victor, is still overseas living his life. He wanted to be here. We forbid him from doing it because he needs to take a vacation. It's completely fine. And we got a really interesting topic that we're going to go into today. But before we even get there, let's just do a general check-in. David, one, how have you been? And two, what were your thoughts on last week's episode?
Woo! I'm doing well. Thanks for the invitation to check in. I also want to appreciate you for. I think maybe us just for, setting some limits with Omar Yanar and saying like, you know what, you're a superintendent, you're a CEO of a school, you've had, a hell of a year, and you're going to be in Europe on vacation, and we're not going to take your calls. So self-care, right?
I love it. We got to do it, bro.
We got to do it. Yeah.
I hate the term self-care, but I also, because I think it should be a very practical thing, I think people weaponize it, but I am so for people doing what they need to do for themselves. Yep. I just hear people abuse that term a lot. That's why I don't use it. But
yeah, right.
He's on vacation. Be on vacation, bro.
There you go. Yeah, doing well. Like last week's show, I've been reflecting on it, and I just, I appreciated, everything that Jorge Lopez put out on the table. I really appreciated hearing his story, and I think most importantly, I just appreciate hearing from people that have like multiple decades, like in the game, in the classroom, in the school, running school systems. It's the best perspective that we have to learn from. And so I just appreciated him for sharing, and also sharing his his roots as an organizer, and the story of being out in rural Butte County, California, being confronted with a pretty sketchy situation. And then it was also very interesting to see I don't want to make too much out of it, but I think it's important. You all talked about it. The fact that he was raised in a Baptist church. And I think, how he, when you see him, you see, to me, he looks like a Latino, Mexicano, Americano, and he is. I would have never thought that he would have been born and raised in a Baptist church. And I think that's just part of the beauty of the interconnections that we have as people.
It made so much sense to me. Even when you hear me talk about me and him, like just my relationship with him, like he just seems super familiar. He actually just reminds me of the OGs that I grew up around, mostly black or whatever, but he got those same aesthetics, man. I thought it was great. And I know he and I kind of caught the proverbial Holy Ghost in that episode. And I loved your reflection, David. You was like, I didn't even know we could do that. Like, so David, you have the way we set up this conversation, I want you to be your full, free, authentic self and have the reactions that you need to have. And let's really just break this down for a little bit, because I know we're saying it like a joke, but let's just talk about the nature of the work that we do and how people like you have to always like, oh, let me watch what I say or how I say it, because people will use how I say it to ignore what I said. And I think this is why I created, we created this space together, and why I do this type of work is so people like you can be really honest. And I think that the data that we're about to go through, there's some very raw feelings and emotions that need to be explored there. And I want you to, damn it, explore them.
Yeah. And I think, I'm excited to dig into the data that we have. And we haven't really done that on this show. I also appreciate looking at data because it just like, it removes the person or the personality behind anything. Like, let's just sit around and look at it, and what have you got to say? And I think the other thing is, if you, you are a person of color, I'm a Mexican American, Chicano,
Black.
I've been on, yeah, there you go. I've been on this planet for a long time, and it's like you learn how to survive, you learn how to code switch. I'm still code switching every day, and I think part of me, and like, I'm just being honest with you and folks that are listening, is like my comfortability level with, being just total, like, no holds barred and letting it all fly out. It's coming, it's there. Obviously, that's been my experience. But I also, spent so many years, kind of as an informal politician working in schools and school systems. And, I'm still unlearning that trait. How about that?
Hey man, listen, I've been around you. You are an amazing educator and you really care about this. And I think that you have always been pretty courageous. And I think that the funny thing is the irony of our work and what brought you to with me and Victor and even, you know, even Jorge is a lot of times the finger doesn't get wagged from the enemies. Well, they always will, right? From the haters. But it'd be a lot of people that's on our same side with don't say that or you can't say that or whatever, right? So,
yeah.
You know, I think those are some real issues, man. I think, you know, as we dive into this, I think it's a USA Today article. And thank you for finding this. I really, truly think that, you know, our job is to take the stuff that everybody can't access, or it's not just something that if you're not in education or kind of a wonk on it, it's just not the thing you gravitating to. It's not like I'm gonna read about the playoffs last night and then I'm gonna read this USA Today data about education stuff during the pandemic. So, you know, you and I have some knowledge here, and I think we should just kind of dive into it.
Yeah. Let's dive into it. I think one brief preface I would say is I think data is really important. Obviously, you know, people are, we're going to talk about some data, but we're really talking about going back to the school year, you know, re-entering school next year, whether it's reimagined or not, you know, and how can we empower like students and parents and community advocates to hold their schools, their school systems, their charter systems accountable. What are the questions? Like what data is helpful for them? We're probably going to go into too much detail right now. But, you know, fact of the matter is that any of the disparities that existed pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, pre-shutdown have either held or have exacerbated.
Well, yeah, man. I think you're absolutely right. And here, let's go ahead and just let's show people the article. I think it's just a wild article, man. So as we look at this here, let's get it this way. The first, just so people know, let me get to the title for them first. This is the report. The report is in USA Today. I don't think you're ready. Boys of color fail further behind at school amid COVID-19. And you can read the whole article. But there was 4 pieces of data that we wanted to really look at and deal with. So the first is stubborn disparities in graduation. So this is 5-year graduation rates for Black and brown kids and CPS in Chicago. And there's been improvement, like there's been growth. But why don't you help us break this down, David? Tell us what you see and what the people out there should see, and then we can have our conversation start from there.
Great. And before we do that, I also want to call out, we're looking at this from a USA Today link, but it looks like this was written from a Chicago Chalkbeat reporter. So shout out to Chalkbeat. Didn't want to look that over. So what are we seeing here? I think the first thing that we're seeing here, we're clearly seeing trends, right? We see some lines that are parallel and some that are not parallel, right? Either growing further apart or growing closer together. And that's important too, because we're also looking back at a 4-year trend, a 4-year look back. So it's pretty consistent. That's a pretty good duration of time to really figure out if you have some kind of disparities within the system. I think the first initial glance you look at, we clearly have a disparity in terms of graduation here. We're looking at Chicago public schools. I mean, you could probably put this up against, most other large urban districts serving the same demographics. And you would probably see similar trends with African-American students across the board, graduating at lower levels than Latinos, whites, and Asians, right? We've seen this data. This is not new. When I was running my school, Oakland Unity High School, I was there for 10 years, Oakland, California. This is during No Child Left Behind, right? During AYP and the API days. And, we paid attention to this stuff year over year over year. And so I can attest to the fact that, while we do see some marginal gains, for the most part, the disparities are just, they're still there coming out of the pandemic and going into the school year. And this is one of the most, I mean, I think outside of the third grade, like reading proficiency, graduation is like, if you either graduate or you don't. And if you are Black or Latino and you don't graduate on time, chances are you may not end up graduating and doing that like summer recovery or that fifth year. And we know what the life outcomes are for Black and brown urban youth that do not graduate with a high school diploma. It's pretty clear. So
yeah,
I'll leave it there.
I think those reactions are pretty spot on. And I think for me, when I look at it, like, okay, we're talking about 5-year graduation data, right? So let's just call it out. Boys in each of these racial categories are lower. In the Black community, it's by double-digit percentage points. In the Latino community, is close to double digits. And I mean, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if we've like talked about that the way that it kind of needs to be talked about. And as we go deeper into a lot of this data and what happened during the pandemic, I think it's going to be very interesting. But boys need some special help. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think you need to raise all boats. I think that girls need the support and are not always getting the support that they need as well. And as the facts show, right, like to be down that many percentage points in a city, robust international city, like my birthplace of Chicago, I think it's something that we can't be afraid to have honest conversations for the sake of political correctness at this point. And I think that's just kind of where things are. And I think if you're a true practitioner and somebody that's really looking at stuff, you gotta really hit this stuff head on. So, I think that's really interesting, man. I'm gonna go to the next one in a bit, but keep going on this piece, man. Like,
yeah, I think one other thing I'm seeing now is that this, the data that's reflected in this one specific graph, and Chicago Public Schools is huge.
Very.
It's I don't know what the exact number of students served is, but it's massive. One of the top 3 districts in the country for sure. We're actually looking at a 5-year graduation rate, not even a 4-year graduation rate. So this data is reflective of 5-year graduation rates. Now, I believe it encompasses both 4-year and then students that took an extra year to graduate, if I'm reading this correctly. So I would say if we were looking at 4-year graduation rates, then the data is going to, everything's going to drop maybe by like 5 or 10 percentage points, if not more.
Well, explain to the lay person, right? Like I get what that means as an education person, the significance of 4 versus 5, right? Why, if I'm just a regular person watching this that doesn't work in education, why is this so significant when we look at 4-year data versus 5-year data?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important piece is that, high school is constructed around a 4-year time period, right? It's 4 grades, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And so the general expectation is that you're completing high school within that time frame. And then the exceptions, I mean, there are many exceptions, are, students that need to make up credits that weren't completed in that first 4-year term.
Right.
And so looking at a 5-year graduation rate, the data is obviously going to look better and or stronger than it would if you were just looking at a 4-year. Interesting. I got to figure out why they chose to include the 5-year as opposed to 4.
Well, this is why I think it's interesting, because I do a lot of work around cohorts. So usually 4 years can be contained. And now you still got people coming into that system and out. You still got, 8th graders, and then that's, whatever the case is, right? But the interesting thing is, when I look at, because I look at this with A through G a lot. I look at the A through G numbers in Oakland and in California, but I also look at cohorts. How many young people got lost throughout that cohort? So when you bring that and expand that beyond that, you tend to see a big spike, either up, down, or whatever the case is, because you're usually introducing a new cohort, which probably means a few things, especially in school board democratized systems. There's usually some type of board turnover that happens. And usually what happens in school boards, let's just should I say this? Should we, you know what?
Say it.
I'm going to say it. I'm just going to, because a lot of people don't know. So listen, there are some people that choose to be on school boards because they love education. And there are some people that use school boards as a stepping stone for their larger political aspirations. Well, here's the deal with that, okay? If you have larger political aspirations, you have to make a splash in whatever office you held. So people tend to go the school board way because it's one of the easiest races to win, not necessarily in California at this point, but it's one of the easier races to win. And then you have to come in and shake stuff up. So when I look at data in that type of way, I'm like, okay, who was a school board member? What were they trying to do? And what were the major policies that may have changed that might have interrupted policies that were already in place that didn't come into fruition? Or, you know, what was like the political clout someone may have been trying to make? And you've been around school boards and for a long time, David. You know, you can disagree with me or whatnot, but just your thought on that. That's when I'm looking at data, I'm looking at who was in those offices and what were they ultimately trying to get to. Yeah,
no, I agree with you. I think that's so you're talking about accountability, right, Charles?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are. I think one of the challenges of having the hope, and I'm not advocating for, you know, closing school boards across the country, but you know, the bars, anybody can get elected to be in the school board, you know, most political offices, right, without the proper training and or awareness. And so you know, in a big system, I mean, Chicago's a different situation because they don't believe they have an elected school board, at least not yet.
They're not elected at this point. I think they're moving towards it though. They just moved towards it. So
I would say, like, if you're in a place like Oakland, you know, the gold standard should be a school board member that is aware and able to look at and expect that the school district and superintendent would regularly present disaggregated data like this, historical data, looking at trends. But, you know, and in California, you have this other level of complexity. Can you imagine looking at this data, Charles, and filtering it through a 4-year graduation rate percentage, and then like an A through G?
Man,
what happens to the data?
It just gets small. It just gets worse and worse is what happens to the data, right? And that's actually what we do. And as soon as our Oakland report is ready on the A through G stuff, I'll bring it here and we can like actually go through it together. And what I've been training parents to do, like we're trying to train them now, is, you know, there are just some additional questions that you can ask. I'm not saying that school boards are bad or anything like that. What I was just trying to note, like link out, is like just the way in which things kind of shift and change. But like, let's add this other piece into the fold, right? So that was local data. This is national data, okay?
Yeah.
So this is national data on reading gains and math gains. And why don't you just, like, for the viewers, David, just let them know exactly what they're looking at, and then we can comment on it.
Yep. So what we're looking at here is a national picture from I mean, some people would argue it's not standardized, or it is, but it's called the NWEA MAP test, right? So it measures progress for students, I believe, like K through 12 in the areas of math, reading, and language usage. And I think in high schools, it gets a little more advanced. But here, what we're looking at are just reading and math gains across the board from a pretty extensive national data set, right? And this is looking at national data on pandemic learning. It says it's still emerging, but scores on one standardized test, the MAP. What it's showing here, the trend is slower academic growth among Black and Latino students compared with pre-pandemic years. So this shows on this one particular assessment that in addition to the regular gap, call it what you want, opportunity, achievement gap, Black and Latino students are already experiencing, when you filter for boys, the gap is even wider on this assessment. And this is an assessment, I believe best practice is that, you know, it's given 2 or 3 times a year. So you can really get more accurate, more timely data. So that's essentially, I mean, essentially this, you know, connects to the previous data that we saw around graduation rates in one particular district. This just says nationally, the same thing is happening.
Mm-hmm. And just for the record, we have put the link in the comments. So I know that Ms. Toya is asking for it. Here, I'll post it again just to be safe or whatnot, right? And so this is I think this is really, really important to look at. So this is before the pandemic started. All right. So again, we're looking at males versus female. Again, males are lacking in every single statistical category, regardless of race. And Black and Latino tend to be trailing by double-digit percentage points, by race to Asian folks. Now, let's really look at it. I don't know how, like, so let's look at the lowest and the highest. So the lowest in reading gains, we have Latino males at 70%, versus the highest, which is Asian female at 103%. And again, I say this with no comment, right? Like, it just is, the data just is what it is. Again, we're practitioners today. Everybody watching today, we're going to be practitioners, and we're going to look at this not through some type of political lens or whatever the case is, but just what are the facts actually telling us. Then let's look at math. Again, the lowest in this bunch is Latino male, 55%, compared to the highest in this bunch, which is Asian girls, which is 98%. That's a lot. What is that? Let's do some math real quick. Let's see how numeric I am. That's 43 percentage points. So, I mean, when we talk about needs and disparities and social justice and equity, right? Like, what does that actually look like? What's the real conversation that we should be having? And this is pre-pandemic. We haven't even gotten to in the pandemic stuff. So just for the people that's out there watching, and I want to thank you, William, Toya, Cherie, like everybody that's in here, keep commenting. We're going to keep having this conversation with you. We need you to like, share, and join this comment, right? And this conversation. Like, what questions does this bring up for you just looking at this? And I mean, again, people don't like to have these conversations. And what I would say is, if you are representing any of these groups, even if you're Asian, right, you have questions. You should be like, yo, wait, what's happening? Like, why is it looking like this? And what can actually be done? So this is just looking at, the gender gap for reading and for math. What is this? Is it saying anything directly to you? And one of the things that we did for you all today, David and I didn't meditate on this before doing this episode. Like, we we glanced through it, but we're kind of looking at this live with you all, so we can go through the process with you around processing feelings and processing this information. So David, what is that bringing up for you, if anything?
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, we're like live streaming and going through this, so I appreciate that. I think looking at the graduation data and then looking at this larger NWEA map data set, which is more than likely made up of like K through 12 data. I see I see a stage being set, right? Like, if your pre-pandemic gains for particular subgroups and particular genders are consistently, lagging, that is going to show up years later in terms of student discipline, in terms of identification for special education, in terms of graduation rates. And then you look into all the different, post K-12 outcomes that are possible for our young people. So I think what this is telling me is, if you are, if you're a gambling person and you understand the art of odds, the odds are becoming pretty clear as we go through these next couple of data pieces.
Yeah, man.
I'm not in favor of Black and brown boys.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is actually really important, right? Like, when I'm looking at this, right, it's just what emotions am I feeling? Because I think it's important. I think it's important to be both very logical about this and also get to be human about it at the same time. I think for me, I'm not surprised. That's one. Two, though, I also think that as I process this, and I'm processing this, and I said this to you off camera, right? But I'm writing a book right now that's free, that is written directly to Black males who would be the first in their family to go to college. And I've gotten a lot of support, right? And it's my free time. I'm paying for everything. There's nothing to be gained there. It's just the book that I needed because I was the first in my family, and I'm going to be paying loans back forever. I made a lot of mistakes just because I didn't have the navigation skills. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting a lot of messages that's saying, well, are you going to focus on this? Why is it just for Black boys? Why is it just for boys? Can it be for girls? Why is it just for Black boys? Can it be Latino boys or white boys or whatever, right? Like, I'm getting a lot of questions, and I think people mean well by it. But when this report comes out, I'm not happy about these numbers, but I'm doing it for two reasons. One, I'm talking about what I know. I'm talking about what I know from a very visceral place and what was missing for me and the difference that it made just in my life. And two, I think that other people can write those things much better than I could, right? So if David is like, yo, I'm going to write this for Latino males, like, I'm going to help him out as much as I can. And I respect the space that he needs to have a very intimate conversation with the folks there. I think that we politicize these type of numbers so much and twist them and make them work for whatever it is that we need. And the facts are this: the people that look like us, especially the boys, our girls are being mistreated. A lot of kids are being mistreated, not getting their just due. And I just happen to be a part of the group that's getting it the worst. I just happen to be a part of a group that we talk about everything except that what the actual data is saying and find solutions for that piece. And I'm talking about it like this on our very public platform because I know that everybody's not going to pick this up, read this data, digest it. And so I wanted us to have this conversation. So we can have just a plain view of it. So for the people that's watching, how does this make you feel? What is it bringing up for you? Like, and what I'm, and I think for everybody, I think that that's personal. It takes a long time to digest data. But this is what we're seeing. And I'll give it the full screen one more time. This right here, folks, is the gender gaps, just as a national issue. And I want to just read what it says. National data on pandemic learning is still emerging, but scores on one test, the MAP test, show slower academic growth among Black and Latino students compared with pre-pandemic years. Boys fell further behind than girls. And I want to make sure that I'm honoring our guests before we keep going, David. So here are just some comments around it. William is going in. Sheree said, I'll be honest, I administered the MAP for over 5 years. I hated it then. I have no reason to believe that it has changed. It was ineffective for determining where students really struggled in literacy. William, what the bleep? I don't know why I bleeped it because I curse all the time. But so he's talking about the growth and that fewer than 15% of 8th grade students are proficient nationwide. There is a link that Sherry put in there that you should all go check out. Toya said that she's mad. Her eldest son should have had an IEP, but nope, smart kid, but they learn differently. And let me go on this thing around IEP because I think she said something really important. I am a social worker, and the way I even got into education is that I used to be the person that went in with my families around IEPs. And so many of our families, Black and brown, did not know their rights. They didn't know they could have anybody in there they wanted. They didn't know that the state had to respond in 30 days if you had a written request for things. And they didn't know that they didn't have to sign on this stuff. And I'm a person that thinks I think every kid should have, IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. In the nature of its name, I think that having that is really important because one, a lot of people don't know this, and David, I know you do. IEP becomes law once you sign it, meaning that you can set standards in an IEP that supersede whatever the district or the charter or whatever is requiring or whatever the state is requiring, right? It acts as a legal arbiter to make sure your kid gets the things that they need. And that's just something that if we actually understood what it was, we could weaponize that and use it to really make sure our babies were getting what they need. Let me tell you some of the stuff that we got out of it, David. I had a kid with special needs. They had issues riding the bus. The districts get sued all the time around IEPs, all the time. So anytime we come in talking that tough talk around it, district don't want another lawsuit. They made sure that that kid had a driver pick them up every single day, that they had an aide come to the house and work on things. Like there were just things that the district had this pot of money set aside for, because one, is cheaper than a lawsuit, and two, we were actually able to get this family exactly what they needed for their kid, and their kid that was supposed to be, special ed, special needs, or whatever the case is, actually start to outperform their peers around them. And here's the thing. They don't want you talking about that stuff. So that's what I see when I see this type of data, and I see what Toya is saying is like, look, you actually can write a letter and you can request a formal IEP. Now they can arbitrate. They can say you don't need one or whatever, but you can get the process started to where they have to respond to you. I know that was long-winded, David, but I just wanted to give somebody some navigational tools and wisdom that they can use.
No, that's great. That's powerful. It's practical too. Just going back to the conversation around the map as an assessment. I think the jury is still out, around the effectiveness or relevance of the assessment. It's a large national data set. So I think it gets a lot of credibility from that. But I think when you look at all of these different, we looked at MAP, we're going to look at a whole bunch of different indicators, and Black and brown boys are underperforming across all of these indicators.
Absolutely.
So you can see that maybe there is some relevance to this tool. The other piece that I wanted to lift up is, I agree with you, Charles. Part of this is, I've been looking at this data for a long time. You have too. But man, when you read it, it's hard. It's difficult to stomach the fact that our large urban and school systems have not been able to move the needle for Black and brown, boys in this situation. And we're looking across all of these different indicators. And, I want to point out the fact that like you, Dr. Cole, and me are part of this data set, right? But we made it out, and that's part of our own personal stories. But like we're in that mix, and I think that's what the connection is for me and to you. Kind of the reason behind us with Omar putting this show together, because like that's us. We are included in those those line graphs that are like that are dropping or whatever it may be. So maybe time to like move on. Let's look at the next set. Let's tackle that.
Yeah, we can look at the next set, man. Yeah. I think, like I said, I think you covered just some really good ground on that, man. And again, data is tough. And, maybe there'll be another report that comes out with more data. I'm sure we're going to get flooded with data in the coming months, and especially in the years to come, right? People are going to study this time in education. Mm-hmm. It's going to become a bedrock. And so, we get to kind of be on the front lines with it. Here, let me pull up this next one. So an uneven dip in attendance. So this right here is a comparison of second quarter. I want to make sure I didn't skip one. I think this is the next one that we're supposed to be at.
Yep, that's good.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, this is Chicago. Yeah, now we're going back to Chicago. Yep.
Yeah. Because, well, actually, okay, yeah. Because the next one I'm looking at is after this. But this is around attendance. And, my friend and both our colleague Jamoke talks about this in Oakland a lot. And I don't know if people are listening to her. She has raised the flag like we have lost children. Like we can't find them during the pandemic. Like they're just gone. Like we just don't know, and there's no accounting for them. So let's look at the dips, right? Yeah. So again, the males are definitely behind, and with some pretty significant drops. 5 percentage points in a place like Chicago is significant. That's a lot of kids, man. That's a lot of people.
Thousands.
Yeah, it's a lot, right? For the third largest district in the country, I think it vacillates between second and third. But that's a huge dip. Same with Latino males, in white and in Asian as well. Even though the disparity isn't as broad, is most broad with Black folks. 5 percentage points. So what does this mean? Why is the attendance dip important for us to understand?
I'm going to make a couple of assumptions here, and you can push back if you'd like. I'm going to assume that most of the downward shift in attendance, especially going into the pandemic, was at the higher grade levels, middle school, high school, right?
Absolutely.
Young people, young boys, young Black, young brown men that had to go work, right? At higher rates than their peers. I think that's one thing. You got to kind of look at it through that lens. The second thing is this is Chicago data. Something that I was lifting up, for a while over the last couple of months in Oakland was that, and backing up, like throughout this pandemic, the ways that schools took attendance was definitely, are you logging in? How it's very, it hasn't been well defined. And so the data, in my opinion, is actually much worse than this. I'll just say that because I think, the rules around how you take attendance and what it actually means softened up during the attendance. Real attendance is probably not this nice to look at.
It's probably way
worse. Yeah.
Worse.
But I will say in connecting what we see happening in Chicago, in Oakland over this last school year, and I give kudos to the Oakland Unified School District for being public about their data. They would publish monthly chronic absenteeism data. So these are kids that just are not showing up to school. Two of our large, flagship East Oakland high schools, Fremont and Castlemont high schools, they saw chronic absenteeism skyrocket during the pandemic with softened rules around how we take attendance. And that just means thousands of kids are have checked out of school. They've essentially dropped out. And there just wasn't a conversation about it, it wasn't a thing. And I think behind this Chicago data, behind data in LA Unified, behind data in Oakland, San Francisco, these are real people. These are young people, right? Yeah. And for Black males and brown males that are in high school, that have come close to completing their 12 years in public education and graduating to move on to the next phase of their lives, this has been a major upheaval for them. Because how are we working best together to make sure that they're returning to school, right? I think we're going to be facing a massive dropout pandemic coming soon once more data comes in.
Oh, absolutely.
It's black and brown boys. I'll be straight up. That's it. And it's coming. And I'll just tell people this too, don't look away. Do not look away at this data, right? Don't move on to we're going to reinvent school and do this new thing. Yeah, do that. And we have, hundreds of thousands of young people out there that have not been supported throughout this pandemic and are at risk of not finishing with their K-12 public education.
Yo, I think, and I'm going to add this piece that I wrote, right? Because I was a student in Oakland for the great 90s, the biggest strike in OUSD history, I think, right? Even the last one didn't quite hit the heights of that one. This is how it ends up working. I'm in middle school. I'm at junior high school at Westlake Junior High School. Mm-hmm. We're walking through pickets. We're walking through, I had teachers yelling at us as we were walking in school, right? And we watched them yelling at the scabs or whatever until eventually we just stopped going. We just would go to Mosswood and go play ball. We would try to, it was stuff happening in the hallways between boys and girls. Listen, man, I'm talking about junior high school, man. The back stairs at Westlake Junior High School with 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, you would have thought it was Cooley High, fam. You would have thought it was a university, right? And what happens is these drops are important because I do think that these numbers are nice numbers. I actually think these numbers are very nice. I think that this is what you're going to see happen. I think that there will be a true dropout rate, but I think we're going to do what we always do in this country when politics comes into play. And depending on who we trying to make look bad, I think that we just going to continue to push kids through regardless. I think that they're going to be kids that didn't do a year of work. or 15 months of work. And so it doesn't look brutal and people can still get their ADA money. I think that they're going to find a way to fudge things. And you're going to get kids that's getting paper diplomas that ain't worth nothing. Remember that so right after I graduated, maybe like a decade later, I don't know. You probably know the numbers a little bit better than I do, David. Let me put you on the screen for it.
Yeah.
When we had the exit exams, what was it called? The
Casey.
The Casey. And here's what the Casey was.
The California High School exit exam.
And here's what the Casey was. The Casey was supposed to say, look, we want to make sure that kids that are graduating at the bare minimum can do, what is it? It was like 7th grade math. Like it was, I forget what the levels were. It was 6th grade math. It's supposed to be like general bare minimal things that people are supposed to know. And guess what happened? We started administering that test and kids were failing. And not just, and what they wanted to point to at first, they were saying, well, it's the international students. We have such an international community in Oakland that is really just like the newcomers. So people started to disaggregate the data. And yes, they struggled, which we knew that they were struggling. No. These were kids that were naturalized here. These were kids that were born here that could not do basic English and math. So here's what happened. You can still graduate if you don't pass the Casey, but there was a diploma and there was a certificate of graduation. Let me show you how this shit works. So in order to get an actual diploma, you had to pass the Casey. If you were just too old and you kept failing the Casey and you got to first take the Casey at the end of 9th grade, beginning of 10th grade, you could take it over and over and over again.
Yep.
And if you just couldn't pass and you just were too old, we just graduated you, man. We just gave you a paper. Yep. And that's what we did, right? And it got so bad, David. Tell them, people out there listening, it got so bad. What did we eventually do, David? Because the data was so bad and embarrassing for California.
Then you stopped collecting data.
You just got rid of the fucking Casey. You just said
it's not a good assessment.
It's not a good assessment.
It's not producing the data that we expected. So
we're not going to do it. Yeah. So that's what we did. Jesus, before we go to this next thing, let me recognize. We got some more people. They in these comments, man. Let's. So Sherry said educators and administrators need better tools, information, and skills. And Sherry, I want to put up what she said. And thank you so much for sharing, because she's in this work, and I know she shares a lot. She said, I spent the last almost 3 years trying to better equip myself so that I could serve students that are counting on me as an educator. At some point, we need to step in as educators and acknowledge that the system just is not doing a good job, specifically for Black and brown students. So how long do we wait before we try something different? I think that's an amazing piece. And I had to post something. I put it in our group, David, where I said, I had to tell people what segregation was. Because people keep telling us what segregation is, David. White people keep telling people of color what segregation is.
They want to integrate our schools, right?
Right. Segregation is being told what I have to do and being barred from doing those things. Choice is me looking at the options available to me and me making a choice. It's very different. Toya said when her youngest was hit by a car, I know there were some typo issues, but basically he suffered greatly, and there was an IEP issue that they were trying to get. And Toya has been a part of our A Black Hands family for a long time, and I've watched her. She's on a board, on a school board, and she's watched our show as kind of her professional development around it. Will has pointed out that there are too many special ed referrals that are proxies for failed grown ability to teach. If I start showing you the people in the hip hop community that are geniuses now, so they said 50 Cent was he at the time, because he's older than us, he was labeled as retarded, who is now one of the biggest moguls in the country, right? They just didn't want to deal with that special Black boy. Sherry said with Black and brown boys, too often we don't look past the behaviors, and too often those behaviors are a result of the failure to meet their academic needs. Tanae said it's worth mentioning that MAP is an adaptive and not standardized test. It'd be interesting to see if it disaggregated, and that's what some of this actually was here. And then she said, when my son...
That's a really important point. It is an adaptive
Tell people what that means, because both of you work in education. For the folks that don't work in education, when you say it's an adaptive test, let folks know.
Yeah, I think the short answer is so standardized is like you are, Charles, going into the 6th grade. You're going to take the 6th grade assessment, right? You are going into the 7th grade. You're going to take the 7th grade assessment. MAP actually adapts to after a student has taken a diagnostic, it then adapts to their level. And then it is based on a child meeting their individual growth targets. And you can see some of the grade level correlation. But it's really it adapts to where a student is in terms of the content area.
Man, and here's the next one, and we're gonna get to the rest of the comments, but I want to get to the last piece of data, and I'll even lead off on this one, David, because I've been making you lead off on all of them. Sorry about that, but this is interesting. So let's look at this next piece of data. It's called an uneven rise in failing grades. Black and Latino boys in Chicago public schools got more Fs in high school math courses during the first half of the school year, widening existing disparity with their female peers. So when you look at these numbers, right, like we're at the top, baby. Oh man, no, the top is not good in this one, right? 50% of these kids got Fs in these classes, in these markings, right? Compared to 10% of Black girls, which is also very high. Let's look at it again, right? And Latino boys who have been at the bottom and top on the worst path of each of these, you know what I'm saying? Like, and this is why I love your voice and I love Jorge's voice, because y'all boys are getting super left behind, and they got them jails waiting for our boys, right?
Yeah, man.
15% for Black and brown boys, compared to 1.5% of Asian females. Okay. Yep. I'm looking at extremes for a reason. I'm looking at that so we can like really deal with it when we talk about these gaps, when you talk about equity, when you talk about all these buzzwords that people like to use and throw around, right? We talk about it, but we don't ever actually fix the problem. And education is becoming worse, or on par at least, with the medical prescription drug field. And let me tell you what I mean by that. It's better if you got the disease so I can keep charging you for the medicine as opposed to just curing it. It's better if I keep needing a class of Black kids, brown kids, or whatever, homeless kids, poor kids that are at the bottom. Chris Stewart says this, and I want to give him his credit when he says that Black kids are the new cotton, brown kids are the new cotton, meaning that there is so much money to be made in the failure and continued failing of our kids, because this would have been fixed had it been any other, had this been white folks at the very, very, very bottom, David, my Lord. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
We'd have a revolution. Yeah.
But anyway, let you have a reaction to the chart.
I mean, I think
again.
I think this chart, the only thing this chart tells me is that all the charts are all of the data that we're looking at, and this is only 3-year data, but you can imagine it's all trending in the same direction. And so you cannot look away. What this is all saying, even though some of it is only representative of Chicago public schools, that's big enough of a data set. In addition to the national numbers here, we could look at LA, we could look at the other big districts, New York. We're heading into an education pandemic, right? Coming out of this disease pandemic, and the big questions are for our school leaders and our school systems around, I'm not talking about like, we're going to do a summer program, we're going to do reading recovery. These are real outcomes that we're looking at that happen while students are in the K-12 system. There are a lot of people that argue that like the assessments are not good, or they're not accurate. They don't measure the right things. They're racist. But we do know that looking at all of these different outcomes on these different assessments and measures, the post K-12 outcomes for Black and brown youth, and they match up. So we're looking at here is really the continuation, if not the deepening, of the school to prison pipeline, right? That's really what it is. Don't call it anything else other than that. And if somebody wants to tell you that, we're going to focus on SE, social emotional learning, and make sure this and that, and we're just trying to keep kids alive, I mean, they're not being honest and they're not being truthful, because really what this data says, big picture, is that the school to prison pipeline for Black and brown youth is alive and healthy and well. A lot of people are looking the other way, and it is more than likely going to get worse for our people.
Man, and here's the thing, man. You know what I'm saying? And I think, and here's the thing. I think that you're absolutely right. I think that, I came up in that SEL world, right? I even write about it. I think that there are some people that actually do mean that, but I think that the framers, the people that kind of created that on some level, I do think that I agree with you on that piece, right? And what we mean by that is, instead of just doing our jobs, right, of making sure these things are taken care of. See, it's like, if we are actually teaching kids how to read, how to write, how to like do the things that they need to do, if we're updating curriculum, if we're teaching people how to learn, we're teaching people to be self-sufficient, then we actually we can broach some of those other issues and topics. But we talked about this last week, and let me. This is called. We're gonna build off of last week's lessons, folks. When we talked about the empire, what are empires trying to do? The job is not. They're not educating, they're indoctrinating. And in our society, you need a low class. You need free labor, right? So when you have these kids with these type of scores, and they're saying, look at these Black and brown kids, especially these boys that are strong. They're going to be strong. We got these jails waiting. This is what happens when people grow up and go to jail, is that you get essentially free labor. I mean, pennies on the dollar, right? And you still get to have your empire. That is how a place that's supposed to be liberal, like San Francisco is the most liberal place in this country. And guess what the report that came out about them was? It is the worst place to be a Black student. How does that make sense? How does the price of living in San Francisco continue to rise, right? Because you continue to get rid of Black folks, you continue to get rid of brown folks, you continue to have people working under the table, you continue to have, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it is all in a system that is supposed that fixes itself every single time. And
you're talking about the good part of like low wage labor, even like market rate, basic minimum wage. That's the good stuff. Those are the people that are lucky. But most of us end up either, houseless, homeless. Once you get involved in the criminal justice system, it tends to be a rotating door given the way that system functions.
Right.
And the end game is like life is short, brutish, and then ultimately like we die. Right.
Right.
And that data kind of pans out if you really want to look at the larger data set from some of this like early like reading to like, post K-12 life outcomes for Black and brown boys, men. You only need to look at like 3 or 4 charts.
You only need to look at 3 or 4 charts, David. And here's the thing. As one of those kids who was homeless there, I don't know if you've ever been homeless, but I was homeless in San Francisco and Oakland. And, the funny thing is that we still continue to build. We have built San Francisco. The San Francisco Bay Area is the technology hub of the world. I think it's going to change because of tax code. I think that people are finally like, I'm not paying these taxes. Companies are like, oh, we're going to Nevada, we're going to Arizona, we're going to Texas. We're not going to keep paying these taxes. So I think it's going to be interesting later on. But this stuff is still being built on the backs of brown people that you say you don't want here, of Black people that you say you can't stand, because there has to be chips get made, man. Who do you think makes the chips? And here's the thing, and they said this in Education of Blacks in the South. There was a plan from before. This is why they said they didn't want Black people to have schools. They said, we have so much free labor with slavery. And now post-slavery, people are still dependent on us. So even though slavery is over, we can pay them a slightly larger, we weren't paying them anything as slaves, but we can pay them pennies on the dollar. If they learn how to read, we will not be able to pay them at these wages, and we will have to have a globalization plan. They talked about this over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And what do we have now? Well, we get those things made in China. And here's the play that China made, because we don't teach foreign and international history to people and current history. China made a different play. They said the Americans are going to go on this democracy thing. We're going to stay communists. And this is what we're going to do. All that goodwill shit that they like to talk, we just going to be big bank. And we're going to make rates so good, so great, that you're going to invest in the government that you say you don't like, the government that you say you hate. We're going to loan them so much money, and we're going to make their Apple products and their Samsung products, because if they make it in America, it's going to be 3, 4, 10 times the price. Like, you have to understand, we live in a global society now. It's not just cars are made in Detroit no more. That world is over. But how are we making sure that young people are understanding the global context in which we are laying in? And here's the thing. I know y'all seen us make a connection to attendance rates and reading rates of a Chicago and national district, all the way to globalization, right? But this is why empires work and why they last. They build things in from cradle to the grave, man. That's why it's called a school to prison pipeline, man. I'm gonna stop because I feel myself getting preachy, David. And this was supposed to be your day where you got to go off. So
no, it's all good. It's our show. I think, connected to the like, if Black and brown youth, are able to read, what are the larger implications for that? Who gets to decide that? And then the other piece is like, what if Black and brown youth actually get to learn their real factual history? Right. What are the implications of that? Right. Well, they have to be able to read first. And then if you can empower them with a culturally relevant, culturally affirming, accurate portrayal of history, and provide space for that dialogue and to make meaning of it for them, that's how you create like good citizens, good global citizens, right? Because your place in the world, you understand it. And so I'm just glad we got through this whole episode without mentioning CRT one time.
Well, we did, and then you just mentioned it, so there you go. Self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, I think here's what I think, man. One, I just appreciate you, David, and I think our true education data wonks don't get the love. And I'm shouting you out because Dirk is one of these. Our friend Dirk in Oakland writes about this stuff all the time. I used to. I was like, I'm tired of this. I'm sick. I can't do this every day. It's depressing. But he still does it. And I think people like you that can see this data and see what's behind it. This is not David and Charles just looking at data and having a reaction, right? What we're showing you is that this stuff is being set up from the gate. Here's what was happening pre-pandemic. And people can say that, okay, let's not call it learning loss. Let's not do this. Let's not do that. This is what the left does, man. And as somebody who was voted Democrat, I used to work for the Democrats or whatever. I think both Democrats and Republicans is a gang, bro. And I think that they actually worship the same super triple OG that you just don't get to be a part of those meetings. But here's why that's important, man, is because we gonna spend more time trivializing the actual name we use than talking about the problem. I'm offended that you said that there's learning loss. What does that mean? Let's dig. Fam, call the shit bamboozle galore, Nike. I don't care, right? Like, how are we gonna fix it so that new generations of young people get to live actual lives of liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, man? Mm-hmm. What does that mean, and what does that look like? You know what I'm saying? And then until we start calling that out, that's when people don't have anything for your argument, right? It's like, oh, well, you pronounced that wrong, so I can't even engage with the topic at hand.
Yeah.
Like, what is happening right now, right? And so
it was a negative framing, Charles. Come on, can we not use negative frames?
And it's like, you can change the name of it, man. Whether you whipping me, whether you call it whipping, whether you call it whooping, whether you call it beating my ass or picking roses, if I leave with a black eye, I still got punched in the face.
Yep.
America, we are getting punched in the face. Brown people, we are getting punched in the face. Black people, we are getting punched in the face. And the way that we move forward is to cut through this bullshit, cut through dumb politics, right? And really figure out a plan for it. What does an independent brown school look like? What does an independent black school look like? And you stand up when people make decisions that they want something better for their kids, instead of telling them that they got to keep feeding into this system that we just broke down for you again. And if you want to be part of that system, God bless you. I ain't mad at you, baby. It's called choice. Because again, segregation and choice are two very, very different things. Why don't you take us home today, David? Give your sermon on the way out, and then we will go from there, man. Because I'm angry. Damn it. Let me get off.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, I think I think the data that we looked at today, like I said, if you've been involved in education in any way, shape, or form over the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, like many of us have, the data has not changed much, right? And so we know the problem persists, especially considering the pandemic. I think the place that we can step in and add some value through this podcast and based on our experience as educators and people that have worked in the education systems. Again, the average person on the street is more than likely not going to be able to translate the data that we looked at and figure out, what does that mean for their individual child? And so in order to channel, some of that anger or sadness or whatever it is that we're feeling after having looked at this, knowing that, again, I'll say it, the indicators that we're looking at are happening within K-12, and we know that there are correlated outcomes post K-12 for Black and brown youth. And we're talking about Black and brown boys specifically today. And that's very real. But then we start looking at housing, at unemployment. I just heard a report today about unemployment for Black males, even coming out of the pandemic, and then looking at the criminal justice system and who is participating forcefully in that system. It cuts across, right? And we know that. And so I think for us on the show, one thing that I hope that we can do, and we'll work on this week, to bring back to advocates, parents, and students that are listening to this podcast or that will, is some practical advice on how you can best prepare to return to school. It looks like most of us are going to be returning to in-person learning next year, in a couple of months for the next school year.
That's a Black Hands show this Sunday too.
Yeah.
Jay Artist, right.
Yeah, for sure. And so, like, what is there a checklist? Is there a something that we can develop for parents and families that are interested in like their specific child? How do I know my child is on track or off track? And what services are available in the system to help my child, right? Both academic and social emotional. So we could work on that, and then just continue to dive into the larger like systems data as it is being shared. There's a lot of it coming out right now. And so hopefully we can be a place to break that down. But yeah, looking at that, Charles, and there was some data that we looked at last week. It's disappointing, but it's not unexpected. And so I think that just, makes our work here on this podcast and the work that we do outside of the podcast even more important, right? Don't look away. That's my message. Do not look away at this data.
Man, good job. We will see you all next time, and Victor will be back. Get home safely, brother.